Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to Lymphatic System and Immunity in Chapter 20. Last time we talked about some of the basics of the lymphatic system. This time we are going to be dealing with a lot of the structures in Lymphatic System Part 2. Now, if you remember from last time, we talked about how there's lots of groups of nodes and different passages and things like that, but we didn't really talk about all these named structures that are throughout the body and identified in this diagram, and that's what we're going to be doing today. Okay, first off, some that you probably do know what they are. You probably don't know what they do, however. Okay, you have the tonsils and the adenoids. Okay, the tonsils, you can see in the upper drawing, are at the back of the throat, in the pharynx area. Now, you can't see the adenoids. They are tucked up here in the lower part of the nasal cavity. Now, if you look at the front view, tonsils you can see, the adenoids you can't because they're tucked behind the uvula, so you can't see them. Now, the tonsils and the adenoids are basically the same type of structure, and what they are is they are actually made out of small lymph nodes that are in these groups, and they are surrounded by connective tissue that kind of connects them all together. So their function is that of lymph nodes. They filter out the fluid in the body and try to destroy the different disease-causing things that are present. If you have ever had your adenoids or tonsils removed, that's generally to remove them when they are getting infected on a regular basis, when the adenoids and tonsils probably get damaged or something happens to them where they get infected and they actually make you sick instead of help keeping you healthy. The other possibility of having them removed is that they were causing you to snore or have sleep apnea. Because what can happen is the tonsils and adenoids, if they are swollen on a regular basis, they can pinch off this breathing area and you end up snoring, driving everybody in your room insane, and hopefully not in other people's rooms. Okay? You can live without tonsils and adenoids, obviously. However, it is always best if you can keep them. They used to regularly remove tonsils, and then they realized, oh, tonsils do something. We should probably leave them there as long as they are functioning properly. Okay, so that is the tonsils and the adenoids. Next, we are going to talk about an organ that a lot of people joke around about because most people don't have a clue at what it does, and that is the spleen. Okay, if you look at the diagram up here, you can see that the spleen is actually kind of tucked behind the stomach, still within the rib cage, and it has the lungs surrounding it, so it is right in there up on your left side. Now, the spleen is actually a very unusual organ in that it filters blood the same way lymph nodes filter lymph. And that means that it's cleaning out the blood on a regular basis. One of the things that happens there is the phagocytotic cells actually destroy old red blood cells. Remember, they get replaced on a regular basis. So when the old blood cells are traveling through the spleen, those cells identify them as old and kind of wearing out, and it'll actually consume them and recycle the materials. Now, lastly, when talking about the spleen, well, maybe not last, you have the fact that it contains lymphocytes. Remember, the lymphocytes are white blood cells, primarily B cells and T cells. I know we haven't talked about what they do yet, but you know they are related to the immune system. Now, if you look at the diagram of the spleen over here, you can see that it is divided up into what's called red pulp and into white pulp. Now, the red pulp is basically where you have those macrophages that are consuming by phagocytosis. That's happening in the red areas. Also, not related to the immune system, but the spleen actually stores excess red blood cells so that if you ever actually are bleeding out and have severe blood loss, it will dump the stored red blood cells from this area into your bloodstream and help you. However, the part we're interested right now is what's called the white pulp. And you can see that over here on the right side. I know it says red pulp, but that means the red pulp is up that way. And you have these areas. And what you'll see is you have a T cell zone, which is kind of towards the middle of the pulp area. And you have a B cell zone, and that's to the outer part. Okay, so these lymphocytes are contained within the spleen, and they are going to be helping with immunity. We will talk soon about what the B cells and the T cells do. I know anticipation is rising. Okay, our next organ that we're going to be talking about is the thymus. Most people don't even know they have a thymus, let alone where it is. So if you look at the diagram up here, you can see that your thymus is actually surrounding the aorta, kind of tucked in between the lungs, and it's right up by your sternum, your breastbone. So it is between those blood vessels and the breastbone. And you can see it's actually made out of two lobes or two sections. It is made out of lymphatic tissue, just like your lymph nodes. So it has that function of cleaning and purifying. However, it also stores what are called T lymphocytes. Okay, those are those T cells we're going to talk about later. It stores them there. Now, what you should notice is T cells. Thymus starts with a T. So it is going to store the T cells, the lymphocytes that are stored in the thymus. Now, a significant thing too for the thymus is that it releases the hormone called thymosin, which matures the T lymphocytes. It doesn't make them, but it will allow them to mature and to grow. Now, what's kind of unusual about the thymus is the thymus actually atrophies or wastes away by the time you become an adult. It becomes smaller and smaller in proportion. It still functions, but barely. You can see when you're a newborn, the thymus compared to your body and your heart is huge, and the older you get, the smaller and smaller it is proportionately. So that's just an unusual thing about the thymus. It probably has to do with how your body functions and developing your immune system. Okay, so that is the thymus. Next up, we have the appendix. And you say, appendix? We talked about the appendix with the digestive system. And yes, the appendix is related to the digestive system. You have the large intestine and the small intestine. It is where they connect in that cecum area, the appendix, which remember just means hanging down. So it's this long skinny thing that hangs down. Now, not long ago, they thought the appendix had no function whatsoever. Evolutionists would state that the appendix was left over from some previous ancestor and that it had no function. Excuse me. However, what they've realized is, of course, it has a function. First off, one of the things it does is matures B lymphocytes. We haven't talked about where they come from yet, but it does have chemicals in it that allow that to happen. Also, your appendix makes antibodies, which will help fight infection. We'll talk about how those work later with immunity. What's kind of cool is not only does it mature lymphocytes, it actually makes molecules that control where those lymphocytes go in your body, which is pretty impressive. You know, that little tiny hangy thing, having that much power. Now, also, what's kind of unusual is that it exposes your immune system to antigens. Remember, antigens are basically diseases, those identifying markers on the outsides of cells. So, having the appendix hanging out at that junction in the gut, the intestines, things go by it. And what happens is it identifies the different substances and can make, or it doesn't make, but it tells the body what antigens are going through, and it will cause your body to actually become immune to those substances. Okay, so it is definitely related to the immune system. It is necessary. And one of the things it does, not necessarily an immune related thing other than the fact that you need these bacteria in your gut, is that it also supplies the gut with with good bacteria if you've had a disease or an illness with a lot of diarrhea, because the diarrhea removes all that bacteria, and you need that bacteria to function properly. So it does resupply that. Okay, the last of the organs we're going to talk about are called Peyer's patches. And these are found in small areas of the ileum. Remember, the ileum is the last part of the small intestine, right before you get to the large intestine and that appendix. And what you can see in this upper picture is these are areas, again, of this lymphatic tissue that are in spots of the walls of these small intestines. And they do a lot of the same types of things. They are able to deal with these different bacteria and things going through. Now, first off, what they do that's kind of cool is they monitor what bacteria is growing in the intestines. And if there is a disease-causing bacteria, it's called pathogenic. If it's pathogenic bacteria, the bad bacteria that's going to make you sick, it actually can identify that. And it triggers your immune system. And what happens is those lymphatic tissue patches in your intestine actually trigger the immune response, tell it what bacteria is there. Your body then goes into the immune response to attack and kill that type of bacteria. Okay, just real quick, a reminder. It's kind of to the side of the immune system. You have the bone marrow, and the bone marrow is where hematopoiesis is, which, remember, is the making of the blood cells, and this is where the lymphocytes are actually made. Okay, the blood cells. Remember, lymphocytes are just white blood cells. There's lots of different kinds, and we'll be talking about some of them as we talk about the immune system. Okay? I will talk to you next time as we keep going through the lymphatic and immune response.